Well, it's Emil Guillermo. Emil, Amok to you. Welcome to my takeout, my takes on all things considerable. This is Emil Amok's Takeout. Today we're going to talk about Norm Mineta. You may have seen what I wrote on the ALDEF website, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund website, aldef.org/blog. I write about how yesterday, this is show 301, by the way, yesterday's show 300, episode 300, caught totally by surprise, did not come thinking about Norm. I hadn't heard it yet. I was prepping for talking about Asian Americans and abortion. And as I mentioned in my column, someone puts up, hey, talk about your time with Mineta. And I spent some time. Look, I wasn't the best. I wasn't with him the longest. I was just a staffer. I was his press secretary, his speechwriter. I worked with him at a critical time in my life. And I also think at a critical time in his, because it was the 103rd Congress. And it was soon after that Mineta decided he would not run again for office. And I think it was a combination of the aggressiveness of the GOP and Newt Gingrich. Remember the contract with America, they called it. Some people called it the contract on America. And I think there was a kind of disheartened kind of sense about what would be the next move for Norman Y. Mineta when he was, after serving in Congress since the 70s. I was with him in like 93. And I knew that there was something going on just in terms of how things were changing in Washington. And so that's when I knew him. And that's the memory from which I write the column that I did. It's on the ALDEF blog. And I just think it's worth taking a little more time to talk about the greatness of Norman Y. Mineta. Norm. We call him Norm. I say Norman Y. Mineta because, well, if you're going to get the Y in there, Norman Y sounds better than Norm Y. Normie. And, you know, in the formal sense, right? Norman Y, yes. Norman Y. Mineta. But we all knew him as Norm. It was a thanks a million kind of guy. He was social. He was self-deprecating. He just knew how to be with people. And which is why today, the day after he passes away, I can't think of anyone who says anything really negative to say about Norm. I mean, I think it's almost impossible to say anything negative about Norm. Although I know that, look, as a former press secretary, I find nothing to say negative about Norm, Norm Mineta. But I'm sure there are people who might say something. But here's the thing about Norm. He reaches across the aisle. He works with friend and foe. He works with adversaries and makes them allies. He is the kind of guy who, of course, works for two administrations in the cabinet, both Clinton and G.W. Bush. Of course, that's Norm. That's the kind of guy he was. And the kind of bipartisanship that isn't that kind of phony, let's work together to get together. It's a genuine bipartisanship. He was friends with all these guys who you would see as arch enemies. And mind you, like I said, I joined the Mineta office in the 90s. it was as Rush Limbaugh was seeing an uptick in how he was changing, some would say poisoning, the political climate since his ascent in 1988, 89. I mean, that's Limbaugh's slow ascent. And finally, boom, it exploded. 95, you saw the whole revolution, the GOP revolution in politics, which really indicated that we were in for some real gridlock, some real divisive politics. And that's where kind of I see how things began to evolve to the state where it's at now. And it was almost set up for someone like Trump to come in and try to pick up the pieces or try to inflame the pieces that were there for him to inflame. But Norm was a guy who was trying to keep things together. He was someone who made things happen, to get things done, to make things better. That's the kind of guy Norman Mineta was. And that's why I don't think I've seen anywhere, not even in chat, the New York Times obituary we read from yesterday on this show, and they have the reply section today. I was looking through it today. I didn't say anything negative. The most negative thing I saw was something that was kind of snarky that said, yeah, now let's get rid of, I'm paraphrasing, let's get rid of Feinstein, let's get rid of Grassley. It was time for Norm. I mean, it was a real ageist sort of thing. Part of the reason about working together is that you can bridge the generations, because you need that generational kind of continuity. That's what makes government work. It's not like, okay, you kick all the old people off the cliff and now here comes the young. Make way for the young. And this is what I don't like about what we're seeing in a lot in today's politics. You know, nasty, well, it wasn't nasty, but the sentiment that there's people out there who want Feinstein out. They say she's not fit for the job. Well, I think she's of sound mind to figure that out for herself. And if she's not, then her constituents, just her constituents in her state, can do that by voting her out if she chooses to stay. I mean, to me, that's the only answer to that. So I like the fact that, well, Norm at age 90 was not in elective office. I didn't even know how active he was. He was in an emeritus situation with all the affiliations he had. And so, you know, like I said, that's the most negative thing I saw in the New York Times reply section, saying, oh, now get all these old people out, essentially. That was the paraphrase. No, you need someone like Norman Y. Mineta. And here's the thing. At some point in his life, in his career, as you age, you go back to the thing that made you what you are politically. I mean, he essentially went back to his roots in the sense that, and it's almost impossible to think otherwise, but he is this Asian American icon. He is this iconic Asian American public presence. He is the embodiment of Asian American public life. The way a public leader should hold himself, a way a public Asian should present him or herself, because you got to work with everyone. He always told me, he said, Emil, there was just, now there's like 23 million Asian Americans, which is still a smallish number. But back in the 90s, when Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, that's what it was called. When APA month was starting, it was like, hey, we're so small, we need everybody. We got to work with each other. Another one of those lessons I learned from Norm. But I think Norm I call him this in my column. And if you go to the ALDEF website, aaldef.org/blog, you'll see it. I put Norman's picture there. I believe it's one of his congressional pictures because I think I remember the glasses and I definitely remember the hairstyle. But to me, that's Norm, right? No, that is Norm's look. He's forever, like, later on, he's gets older, he gets a little less, he looks young in that congressional photo. I believe that's a congressional photo. I think I was sitting in with him. That's how I remember him. He's got the glasses, the smile, that photo. Because that's when I worked with him. The 103rd, I was his press secretary, his speechwriter out of the district office, but worked in Washington. And I call him in my column, I call him Mr. Asian America. Because I dare you, is there another, who's Mr. Asian America? Aside from Norman Y. Mineta. Don't say The Rock. I think The Rock is a good example of the African-American, Samoan-American mix. Yeah, I honor The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. But, they're pop culture guys, yeah. But you notice whenever you need someone to lead on issues, we always tend to go to celebrity. We tend to go to movie stars, TV stars. Not that some of them aren't great spokespeople. I mean, Daniel Day Kim, yeah, great guy. I mean, he's an actor. He's serious. He brings an audience. He lends his name. It's great. I love him. But a political figure who is not divisive, a political figure who works with everyone, is there another that you can think of in the Asian American space? I mean, I think Norman Y. Mineta is probably the last of a breed. And you might include people like Bob Matsui, California congressman, Sacramento area, his wife Doris Matsui, now representing that area in Sacramento. You might include, well, he's passed away, Dan Inouye, Patsy Mink. Like I said, the real stalwart political Asian Americans have mostly passed on. And now you still have some people at the caucus, the Asian Pacific American Congressional Caucus, and they're strong and they're building their reputations. Judy Chu, Ted Lieu. I think he came on strong in his first couple of years, and then he's kind of, I know he settled in. I don't know if it was because of his health during the impeachment. I love Ted Lieu. So we have a number of young Asian Americans, but when I was asked, maybe about a decade ago, they asked about when or if we'd ever see an Asian American president. Who would that be? Aside from someone like Norm, I mean, now you say, I was asked that 10, 15 years ago. Now you'd say, well, there's Kamala Harris. She's the vice president. She's heartbeat away, right? And with this abortion issue now, this is maybe right up her alley in terms of a message that she can carry to vitalize the Democrats, vitalize Asian Americans, although the Asian Americans don't need vitalizing. I was surprised the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum said Asian Americans, 74% want to see Roe kept intact, according to the latest surveys. Latest, I mean, this is circa, within the last 2 years or so. I don't know what that would be like now, but I think definitely it would be pro-choice. So I think Norm clearly was that guy. Now, if I left out someone, put it in chat. If you're watching on Facebook at emilguillermo.media, or maybe there's a chat function in the YouTube page, or just send me an email at emil@amok.com, because I can't think of one. I can't think of another Asian American. Some rising, like I said, Kamala Harris is right there. But we could use more. Oh, don't want to be remiss. Here in California, this is the opportunity for Rob Bonta, Filipino American Attorney General. I've always thought Rob Bonta had that he was in excellent position for the long haul. He's running for Attorney General this time after being appointed by Gavin Newsom. Who knows what's next? But it's always, this kind of discussion always happens when someone like a Norm passes away, because someone described him as a giant. I describe him as Mr. Asian America. He was Mr. Asian America. And his passing in the first week of May makes this a special AAPI Heritage Month. And you can add the NHs for the Native Hawaiians if you want. All I know is, like yesterday, when I came here to talk on this web program, Emil Amok's Takeout, I was not prepared to talk about anything about Norm or how he used to call it Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I was ready to talk about abortion. And then I see my friend of mine, John Tresvina, send me a chat message saying, talk about Norm. It's a sad day. And if you heard show number 300 yesterday, it's online on my Twitter account at Emil Amok, or on the Facebook page, emilguillermo.media, or on amok.com, episode 300. I couldn't believe it. I said, oh my goodness. I could not believe that he had passed. And look, at age 90, you say, all right, you got to be prepared. But Norm was such an icon of Asian American public life and of the community's political, and, he was just the moral exemplar. It's hard to get used to the idea that Norm's not there, that Norm's gone. I mean, even when he's not in your immediate presence, you just feel like, oh, certainly Norm's there. Norm's got to be there. That was Norman Y. Mineta. He just had that kind of presence, and he had that everyone loves him, reach from all sides of the aisle, everyone's friend. You knew that he can get along and that you can come out of anything if Norm was on your side. Mr. Asian America. You didn't have to worry. Do we have representation? We got Norm. Okay, we got representation. That was Norm. So when I heard, I just said, oh my goodness. I was I mean, listen to the tape. I was kind of shocked, trying to stay composed, trying to simultaneously say a silent prayer in my head as I tried to figure out Norm is gone. You know, I was just thinking about him. Thinking about, because you always think about Norm. When you think about Asian America at all, in whatever context, it's hard not to think about Norm Mineta. I mean, for many Asian Americans, he was like a father figure. Like I said, Mr. Asian America. And for that little short time, I got to be close to him. Because, you know, when you're press secretary, you know, he works all day, you work all day. I mean, here's the thing that's true about politics. I mean, you may work in other areas, other fields, you may have numerous other jobs, but when you work in politics, when you say the word boss, it means something. The boss is the elected. The boss is the boss. And you are there to serve, not in any kind of negative, bad way. I mean, you're there to serve the master public servant. He's there to serve the public. You're there to serve him. That's the way it works. So I was press secretary and speechwriter, 1993, the 103rd. And I remember, I mean, the only times I really spoke for Norm, I mean, I'd speak to reporters and say no comment, or one time a local reporter in the Bay Area asked about the Bosnian War. I gave him some kind of quote. Must have been a slow news week. But you're there to make sure that Norm was prepared to do his job. That's my job. And it was interesting coming from a field like broadcast journalism, where I was at NPR, I was at All Things Considered, coming from television initially in San Francisco, where I first met Norm. I was at the NBC affiliate. I mean, that's how Norm and I knew each other, because I would do stories in San Jose. We'd get to know each other a little bit just in passing. Hi, Norm. I didn't really know him. And, you know, there is this rule. I don't know if I got it from Chris Matthews or what, but there's a line between journalism and politics. And you get to cross the line once. And maybe you get to cross the line back once. And that's it. None of this back and forth, back and forth. None of this, okay, I got elected, but I'm tired of being in Congress. Let me go on Fox. None of that. Oh, I'd really rather be just a spokesperson. So I'm going to give up my district in Ohio, and I'm going to go on CNN. No, none of that. I'm going to retire and get my salary. No. If you're a journalist, you go once over just to see how it's done. And then you say, okay, and you come back. Now, I don't know what I was thinking, but I thought, I'm in Washington. I had left NPR. Let's see what democracy's like on the inside. And that normally would apply if I was looking for a job, say, with all the people who had jobs open when I was looking for jobs on the Capitol, Senate, or House of Representatives. But working for Norm was different. Working for Norm was special. He wasn't an ordinary politician. Like I said, he was the embodiment of Asian America in public life. He was our hopes and our dreams. He was our cries, our sorrows. From the time he was a Cub Scout, incarcerated with other Japanese Americans during World War II, to the time he served in government, Norm was there for us. You know, he was a fighter and redeemer when he co-sponsored the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. That's what got justice to the internees. Now, forgive me, I said American Civil Liberties Act at some point yesterday. The Civil Liberties Act, they called it. And I was surprised when I read the Times. It said more than $1.6 billion was paid out to more than 82,000 Japanese Americans. That's a lot of reparations. But that's what we have to thank Norm for. I mean, he was that difference maker. He was in that fight to rectify the historical transgression that gave, look, the incarceration of Japanese Americans. That transgression gave Asian Americans moral authority to this day. Moral authority. All you got to do is mention internment, and people understand what that means. It's something that America did to its own, and its own Asian Americans, Japanese Americans. And it was Norm who worked to get those reparations passed. No small feat. Of course, no small feat because he wasn't alone. There were others doing some lifting. But I know when I worked for him, that was, it was almost like, what more can you do? How many more Everests are there, right? And yet this is part of that continuing evolution of Norm Mineta in public life. He had this career arc, this crazy career arc, where he basically served locally in 1971, mayor of San Jose, first Asian American mayor of a major city. There's a lot of firsts in everything he did, a lot of firsts. First Asian American mayor, that was a big deal. But, he could have rested on his laurels and said, that's it. I just want to go up and down North First Avenue. There used to be a restaurant there called, it was Plateau 7, I think. I think it was called Plateau 7. My office was right next to it. That's how things are going for me. But he was at the top of this office building, or he wasn't at the top, I was. But it was really, if you were an insurance broker in San Jose and became mayor, that would be pretty good. You can rest on your laurels. But no, he ran for Congress in 74. That's when he was first elected. He left in 95. That's when the Gingrich contract on America, or contract with America, Gingrich called it. Really the revolution of the conservatives in Congress and the beginning of this divided government. I can understand why in 95 Norm decided to leave. In fact, I wrote an op-ed piece, San Francisco Chronicle in 95, talking about Norm. Norm reemerged in government, and the more Asian American first. Came back, Commerce Secretary during the Clinton cabinet. Then came back, Transportation Secretary under G.W. Bush. Now, this was his thing. Transportation Secretary. The guy was a transportation geek. He just loved talking about it. I mean, I've heard other people say that line. There are no Democrat roads, no Republican roads, no Democratic highways, no Republican highways. It was Norm who I first heard say those lines. And it was perfect. Public Works and Transportation, which is what he was the chair of that committee. And that was his real desire all throughout Congress. I remember one of the big things was, would Norm go into leadership, try to go for the speakership, or would he rather be a committee chair? Because, look, you can get a committee chair and you can ride that into the sunset. I'm talking about how congressmen talk about their careers and building their careers. Some people, I just want ways and means. That's all. I want to be judiciary. I want to be, they figure out a thing, a path. Norms, it was planes, trains, and automobiles. And he wrote it. Some people call it the pork committee because you're passing out pork. That's the less flattering thing. But what it was a lot of power, because people came to him because he had the power to say, here's something for your legislator to bring back to your district. It was the way in Congress. Nothing unethical. It's just this was the way it was done. Norm Mineta knew how to play Congress. He knew how to play the game of Congress, which is why, again, in 95 when he left, it was kind of like, why are you leaving, Norm? You know how to play this game. Well, it's because Norm kept evolving, kept changing. Like I said, Commerce Secretary under Clinton, Transportation Secretary under Bush, serves 2 presidents, 2 cabinets, 2 parties. That's a master politician. That's what Norm Y. Mineta was. And then, of course, he leaves or, you don't stay forever in those jobs. And he ended up working at Lockheed Martin, which was really close to his heart, aerospace, working with the government, working in that industry. And then he was vice chair of the public relations giant Hill and Knowlton. I don't know Norm or that Norm that well, because every Norm was like a new Norm, a new phase of Norm. I knew the 1993 Norm, the people's Norm, the Norm who drove a Dodge Colt because he wanted to have an American car. I knew the guy who worked all day, carried that huge bag, had this big bag. We're all carrying bags of newspapers, books, surveys, reading material. There was no internet. This is before Al Gore invented the internet. Those of you of a certain age get that joke. There was barely email. And in fact, there was a great temptation to use private email back then because the standard office, no one knew standard office. We had to learn all that. People were learning on the fly. But he'd carry this bag of homework with him to the Dodge Colt, drive himself home, drive himself back. That was Norm. He was a grinder. He was diligent. He was persistent. And this was after he had climbed Everest. This is after the victory of the Civil Liberties Act. I didn't join till 93. The Civil Liberties Act was like 88. That was like a good 5 years after. He's still grinding, still evolving, and still in 93, not quite where he would ultimately be in the cabinet, in 2 cabinets, in 2 administrations. So I know that Norm, the 93 Norm, the Norm I remember, early 90s, when I'd hear him talk about his old friends, Alan Simpson, whom they met when Simpson was a scout in Wyoming and visited the scout Norm Mineta, who was incarcerated at Hart Mountain. 2 scouts, one free, the other incarcerated, later both congressmen. They worked together and stood for a kind of bipartisanship that you don't see these days. You don't see it all. And so I mentioned Henry Hyde. Henry Hyde, ready to lambaste for his Hyde Amendment. He's the guy who did the Hyde Amendment, which denies federal funds for abortions and public programs like Medicaid and Medicare. Norm was good friends with Hyde. But that's a political lesson. That's what made Norm great. I mean, legislation is one thing, but we're still human beings. We don't have to go to the mat and fight each other and fight to the death. I mean, the goal is to make your adversaries friends and your friends better friends. You keep the channels open, you form new alliances. For some, that may sound too Republican for your taste, but for Norm, it was a matter of trying to get at solutions, trying to work together, trying to make things better. So, believe me, when I talk about Norm, believe me when I say it was an honor to speak for him on occasion. What didn't happen often, but occasionally they'd ask, what do your boss think? What does he say? And I was happy to be with him. Like I said, sometimes he just needs an umbrella. Sometimes he just doesn't want to get wet. You got the extra hand. Sometimes you carry things. Sometimes, but it was an honor because he was Mr. Public Asian American. Or Public Asian America. But I knew that ultimately I had to go my own way. And I had to leave. And just because I wasn't growing my way in his shop, doing the kind of things that you do for a great leader. And I think partly, as I said yesterday, I didn't want to disappoint him. If my journalistic instincts in me rose up and got in the way, not that they would have, but I knew my heart was on the other side of that aforementioned line. That when you're in the journalism, you cross over once and maybe you cross back once, but all just once. And it was time for me to cross back. So it was after he served in the cabinets, in both cabinets. Norm was invited to speak in San Francisco by my friend John Trezina at the Harvard Club in San Francisco, and John invited me to speak before Norm, and I was only too honored to do that, to be Norm's warm-up. I got to see him again, and he was pensive during the pensive parts of my talk, and he was laughing during the funny parts. It was just like the good old days, and I certainly got to hear what he had to say. And then when he left the venue at the evening's end, I just remember going up to him as we departed, waiting for cars, or he was waiting for a car to pick him up. And that's when he whispered to me the words that I have never forgotten, because they came from him. A man I revere, a man who I see as this great Asian American icon, and frankly, a guy who too often I caught myself calling Dad. And I'll just never forget that time when he said, I love you. Because anyone who worked with him knows what that feeling is. I loved him too. We all did. He was our boss. We loved him because he was and will be forever Mr. Asian American. I mean, I was trying to think of, like, what are the things that I remember about Norm? What things do I recall? That thing sticks out in my mind in all the years. And I saw him subsequent to that, and each time subsequent, it was good. I mean, but I wasn't working for him. My concentric circle kept getting further and further apart from where he was. But he kept busy. I just remember seeing him maybe it was 2017, 2018, where he was still looking good. That would be 4 years ago. But now, Norm Mineta, Mr. Asian America. He's the Asian American I call Mr. Asian America. I mean, that's it. I mean, like I said, who else has that kind of standing, that kind of both the panache, the experience, the gravitas, the vanitas, all the tosses. I can't. And if you have one in mind, put it in chat, email me, and let's honor him or her. Because we're at that stage where, well, maybe we're just in that developmental stage. New generation of voices, new generation of people. But it's always worthwhile to spend a little time to honor those who came before us and those who are coming after. It's part of that lineage. It's that constant change, that evolution. And maybe that was why he kept evolving, going from Congress to the cabinet to private sector to all excellent jobs. Because he was full of that kind of capacity to serve and to serve well for us. Norman Y. Mineta, 90 years old. Like I said, if you find anyone who says something negative about him, send me an email. I can't think of one. I haven't seen one. I can't imagine there is one. So before we leave, just a couple of quick things I want to talk about. Did you see where people now, I said, if you go to my LDEF blog, I said, look to see who gets COVID. And I see reports that it looks like it was reported that Jonathan Karl, ABC News, tested positive. Hopefully he's asymptomatic. But this is a thing now. These are people, if you go to the LDEF column at aaldef.org/blog, I asked, I was thinking aloud, who's going to be the first from this 3,000 person event to come down or test positive with COVID? And it looks like a number of journalists, perhaps most noteworthy, it was reported, Jonathan Karl, ABC News, tested positive. I think the lesson here is wear your mask. Continue to mask up. I know people who are in Washington, D.C. this week, and they were masked, and they will go back home to their respective homes and they'll quarantine because it's the only responsible thing to do. I just worry that we're acting in this country like it's all over, but it's not. It's not all over. And I mean, we could predict that something was going to happen with the White House Correspondents' Dinner on Saturday. We could predict that Joe Biden would get 14 seconds of laughs in one single joke, as he did. A couple of really good jokes. But we also knew that his approval rating wouldn't rise by 14 percentage points. So there were some things that were predictable. I for one, am sad that some people got sick, because as I was watching on the very antiseptic C-SPAN channel, the channel that will not enable you to catch COVID if you have your television working correctly, I just knew that I saw how people were packed in. I know that room. And as soon as Joe Biden started to be funny, as soon as Trevor Noah started to be funny, as soon as people started spreading out their spitules of saliva, I knew that we will be lucky if a very small number of people test positive. Here's the thing. If you read The Atlantic, you know this. Article by Yasmin Tayag said we could be in for an invisible wave. No one knows, because our testing isn't very accurate, the data isn't there. People take personal tests and they don't report it to anybody. So we don't know. We don't know what's, who's getting sick or what the positivity rate. But the last positivity rate I heard someone mention, which was this week, 6.5. Usually they said during the lockdown, hey, if it's below 5, it's good. So we're 6.5. It's like trending up. Not so great. So that concerns me a little bit. I don't like the idea of a 6.5 positivity rate. Of course, it varies from what area you're in, but it's not, I don't think it's a good sign. Still, I mean, if 5 makes people less concerned, still 5 means you're masked. 5 means you're distanced. The positivity rate in some areas is down to the ones. Single digits. Well, 5 would be single digits, but down to like 1 point something. That I'd be more comfortable with. I think we got to worry. We got to look at that positivity rate. I know people have stopped looking at deaths. We're marching toward 1 million, but it's not a good sign that we have people testing positive after the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And like I said, there are no Republican or Democrat viruses. They're just out there to get people. Use caution. Mask up. So, I don't know if the news today is fairly basic in terms of what's going on with the economy. People are hurting, and the Fed raised interest rates by 0.5%. So the stock market went up. Interest rates are going to be high for consumers, but the corporates like that. But people are already buckling down and not spending. They never ask Asian Americans. They always put us all in this one big information bucket. So CNN did a poll. What's the most important issue facing the country? That should be fairly simple, right? Everyone should say, why immigration? No. Racial justice? No. The economy. As James Carville said, it's the economy stupid. It's the economy. 50% said the economy. And this is an SRS poll, CNN poll, conducted April 28th through May 1st. Of course, my big gripe about any poll is, do they ask Asian Americans? What do we think? Well, here's what I think. 50% the economy, I think that's too high. I know I wouldn't say the economy isn't the most important. It's important, but it's not the most important thing. Here are the other things. In general, 50% said the economy, 14% said the Russian-Ukraine war, 10% only said immigration, 9% said climate change. So more people worried about people crossing the border than they do global warming. Or actually, it's close. 10, 9, it's actually close. Racial justice, though, only 5% cared about that. I would stick that up higher up, racial justice. Only 5% said coronavirus. So all this talk about the White House Correspondents' Center, you don't care about that. Only 5%. 4% said education. Because if more people said education, you'd learn more, you'd know more, you'd give a lot more. You'd have a lot more to say about this poll. I screwed up on my sounder. Education at 4%. That's why you have people spreading lies about critical race theory. Because who cares about education? I think it's appalling that they're only 4% are worried about it. I'd be more worried about education now. All right, this is what does an Asian American think? Economy's up there, but not 50% up there. I'd say 25, 30. And then I'd spread the rest between Russian-Ukraine war, immigration, climate change, racial injustice. See, it's tough. But given this list, education is down low. I would say coronavirus is only down low because time. It's been time. And all those other things. Do you knock down racial justice? Do you knock down climate change? Do you knock down immigration? No. I think you want immigration to be top drawer because we need to do something about the border, and we need to do something about Asian Americans, about refugees, about visas, about all sorts of things. But of course, it's not Joe Biden's fault. Look at the government or the lack of government that Donald Trump left us with. I mean, he didn't fill most of the positions. The State Department, other departments. I think you got to give Biden some slack. At least, well, I think you got to give him a couple of years slack because he's had to dig himself out of a hole, not of his making, but of Donald Trump's making. Okay, that's going to do it for our show today. Look, I thank you for watching. I'm curious if you have a name of a politician you think is the next Norman Y. Mineta, male or female. I think the thing about being a leader, the next Norman Y. Mineta, is that you can be of either gender, but you have to have some standing. You have to have been there a while. And I don't know who has, except people like Judy Chu. Oh, I was remiss to say, look, Maisie's carrying the ball in the Senate. I don't mean to give short shrift to Mazie Hirono. And there is Grace Meng is great. She's doing some things on the East Coast, and then Judy Chu. But I tell you, there is not going to be another Mr. Asian America, another Norman Y. Mineta for a long time. A long, long time. That's my little backflip. What is it? It's like it's the sound flippy, the sounder. A bumper, a little bumper. Hey, look, regular listeners to the show know that at this juncture, I try to do something nice for us, or we could do this together. We do our meditation. It's always the back end meditation. If you're feeling any kind of shame, I mean, because you know what shame is, right? Shame is a yearning. You're yearning for some kind of love because you did something wrong. You don't feel you're enough. But we can beat that. We can beat that shame. How do you beat that shame, Emil? Oh, easy. Loving self-compassion. Loving self-compassion. Yeah. Loving self-compassion. Take this hand here, put it here like this. Take this hand, put it here like this. Give yourself a squeeze. You're okay. You're all right. You are all right. Despite what's happened, you love yourself unconditionally. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Rest in peace, Norm. Till next time. I'm Emil Guillermo. Mahal.